we can start to chat a little bit about what this session's covering is educational competitions and understanding how competitions can be used to drive workforce development and engagement. That we wanted to really get into some of the opportunities that educators of all kinds, whether you're involved in K-12 education or university post-secondary education, or you're just an informal educator, doing things in your off hours, wherever. But we wanted to really talk about how educational competitions can be used to inspire teachers and engage students, and then just really thinking about how do we reinvigorate learning. This is one of those things where learning should be fun. Learning should be something that every student gets excited about. So those are some of the things that we're really going to focus on in this session. Just to give everybody a little background on who I am, where I'm coming to from for all of this. I'm the CEO of the Institute of Competition Sciences. I am also a certified planetary scientist, space nerd, education entrepreneur, and a firm believer that at some point in the future, I will live on the moon. Maybe at least just for a little while. I don't know how long my wife will let me stay up there, but I'd love to do it, at least for some point, before I can't do things anymore. So my background really comes to this, from the science, side of the world, but I transitioned from being a research scientist into being a education entrepreneur early in my career. I was, starting out going, into grad school to be a research scientist. And I quickly realized that I got excited about the opportunity for trying to engage other people in just getting excited about science and technology engineering. So I left the research side of things to go and join a nonprofit, a small nonprofit at the time called the X Prize Foundation. I think a lot of people in this group probably know of the X Prize. But that really got me started more down the route of understanding how competitions can be super powerful in really every aspect of our lives. And after I was in the X Prize for a few years, I decided to separate from the X Prize and started working on my own company, the Institute of Competition Sciences, to look at the broader picture of how competitions can influence education. I'd been involved in lots of different kinds of educational competitions for decades. I mean, ever since I was in, I don't know, probably middle school is where I first got introduced to some of the educational competitions. But we started to really get into the world of how do we use competitions in education and workforce development, and why is that so important? So in 2012, I created the Institute of Competition Sciences, and that's my current company here. But what we focus on is using the power of competitions to advance science, technology, and education. And we do that in lots of different ways. We work with many other partners to help influence and develop new competitions that'll help spark excitement in all different kinds of STEM areas. We provide platforms and online services to help groups put together competitions. And really, we try to just raise the tide, for everybody that wants to figure out how do we use these programs in or whatever educational setting that we might be in. So that's a little background on myself, ICS, why I'm here and talking about competitions. I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do in this session. So when I think about it, there's really two outcomes that I'm hoping that you all can get out of being here with me. First is just to understand how we use competitions to tackle big challenges. What are the systems and the mechanisms behind a competition that makes it so powerful in influencing students and helping teachers and just changing the landscape of education. So giving some of that basic background will be some of the first things that we're talking about here. And then I want to make sure that you all know how to use competitions as part of your own efforts, whatever they be, whether they're in a formal classroom or at the university or just in informal environments, or if you're working at an company and thinking about, well, how do I connect in with workforce development through some of these competitions. So that'll be the real second outcome that I hope everybody can get out of being here today. So before we get into all of that, I'd like to take just a brief moment and hear a little bit from everybody that's online. And if you have a chance to just type into the chat, well, why are you here? What is it that you all would like to know about competitions and education? If it's specific to the aerospace world, or specific to K-12 environment or whatever, just let us know, because that would be great to see in the chat if there's anything that that would be interesting for you all. Or you can shout it out if you want.
Yeah, it's a small enough group. If anybody wants to pipe in anytime, feel free.
I'll always talk.
Go for it, Leon.
I'm a retired classroom teacher who became a park ranger because I work a whole lot better in informal settings. I'm applying to be a solar system ambassador with JPL because I study planetary geology and the rheology of impact cratering mechanics. I try to put that in my lesson plans and park tours, but it sometimes doesn't work. And I'm working in a local Analemma society. We have a roll-top observatory, and now thousands of people are coming to our viewing sessions. I'm interested in hands-on ideas. I use puzzles, word searches for kids, bingo games for adults. Adults love bingo. And I'm looking to make some contacts.
Awesome. That's great to hear, Leon. Yeah, I think we can share some ideas that might help you out there. And I see in the chat Kevin's a space science fan and an educator. Kevin, which level of education are you involved in?
Well, I'm K-12.
K-12? Okay.
Now I do a
Awesome.
lot of staff development with teachers, so I know a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we do a lot of work in the K-12 world, so we can definitely talk about some of the specifics there. I see Jen started up the Young Astronauts Club in Australia, so that's very neat to see what you're doing there, Jen. And yeah, I think there would be a lot of interesting competitions in the club space. So I think in the club side of things, you've got a lot of freedom around what you can do. That formal teachers don't have nearly as much freedom, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the slides more. So, okay, well, I'll
quick,
start
Josh,
to get into.
great to be with you. Just wanted to share.
Yeah.
We have some assets out here on the Space Coast. We're about to reopen the SANS Space History Center, which is a facility run by the U.S. Space Force Historical Foundation. And also, we're working to reopen a facility called Exploration Tower, which stares straight out at Cape and Kennedy. And the programming, those are great facilities to watch launches from, but we're like on non-launch days or throughout that, we're setting up partnerships with great organizations that are doing some of this, but then we're also exploring, what are some of those uh, competitions that we could do that are kind of around, wrapping our arms around Cape and Kennedy, especially with the launch cadence that we're going to, there's going to be 150 or more this year and 200 in the coming years. So that's kind of my interest in all the great work that you're doing.
That's really great to hear, Jim, and congratulations on getting all of those things up and running. I'd love to hear more about that in the future too. Just I think there are a lot of educational competitions that would tie in with launches, and I mean you've got everything from your rocket competitions to other just like more hands-on submission kinds of things that students can look into. And so
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of opportunity I think out there. So
Cool. Awesome.
I'm also seeing Teresa is in the chat here. So a primary school teacher in Southern Mexico. Welcome. Good to have you with us. Working on getting your own projects up and running related with STEAM skills. So yeah, we can certainly talk more about the kind of breadth of competitions across all areas of STEM or STEAM. We also have Paul. Hi, Paul. Nice to see another physics astronomy teacher in the UK. So yeah, we're spread out all across the world here. This is great. Find out you want to find out more about U.S. astronomy space competitions. So you can talk a little bit more about high school students. And Leanne, yep, great former classroom teacher, park ranger, looking at geology. Leanne, as far as the geology connection, I'm a rock nerd myself too. So, I went into the planetary science side of everything, but there's a few specific competitions that we're running that really tie directly into the geology side of things, using lunar and Martian simulant. So, thinking about how do students get connected in with understanding lunar geology, but also what can you use with the simulants and how can you put them into use for like in situ resource utilization. Even knowing the word regolith is important. Very, very true. So, okay, well, I want to get into a little more of the background here. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is to really just take us back. I want to go into really, well, what do we mean by competition? Because there's a lot of controversy in the education space around competitions. And a lot of people think it's a scary word. A lot of people think the competition just looks mean and aggressive and like, hey, if we're going to get into a competition, something's going to bite you. And it's something that we need to be at hands length with. Well, I'm here to talk about how that's really not the case at all. And there's a branding problem around competition, particularly with education, a lot of times. So, to really understand what we mean by competition, I want to go back. I really want to go all the way back. I'm talking about back 3.8 billion years or so. So, we can think about how competition comes from nature when we think about well what makes nature nature. You think 3.8 billion years ago the earth was young, it was still this fiery ball of molten rock and lava running around, and somewhere out of that you had two little microbes pop up, and however they popped up, we don't know, but they did, and those two microbes, basically they had to compete for resources. So you had one microbe that could access energy, better than another, and it could get those resources in a different way, and that allowed it to proliferate. So something like that was the very basis of competition. And what I really like to think then, as you kind of move forward, the first person to define competition was this guy. And hopefully most of the people on here kind of recognize this picture, but this is Charles Darwin. And I love making the connection between Darwin and competition, because it really shows that this is nature. It's spread throughout everything that we know. I mean, we compete in the natural world. Everything competes in the natural world. Darwin was one of the first ones to define competition and really made it a popularized theory. His on the origin of species by means of natural selection was the official title, but we just think of it as natural selection now. So natural selection is, competition. It's, competition between different types of life, different types of organisms, and seeing, well, which organism has access to resources and energy, better. So, we can go beyond that, of course, and we have to really think about, well, what then do we mean about competition outside of just the natural life, and what happens in the kind of broad sense of the term. So I want to again just stop for a quick minute and see, well, how would you guys define competition? What would you say is a good standard definition of the term competition? If anybody wants to give a shout out on that or put something into the chat. Leanne says it's not who is best. All right. Any other thoughts on how you define competition?
I'll say that it's a play where a couple of parties go hand to hand with each other to grow and like make yourself show yourself as like better off.
Yeah, so going against others to see who's better at certain thing. Jen has a good thought in here. Challenge could be personal or within a group. So absolutely, yeah, you can have internal challenges that you're putting up for yourself, or challenge against others for the same thing. So let me share what the dictionary says. For the younger ones on here, you might not know what a dictionary is anymore. But according to Merriam-Webster, competition, the act or process of competing. Okay, not very helpful there, but the active demand by two or more entities for some resource in short supply. So yeah, that kind of brings up the idea that well, you're competing against two or more entities for a resource that is in short supply. Well, this is how I will define competition. So, in what we do on the educational world, we try to look at competition as a very base, kind of process. So a process by which two or more options are tested to determine the most successful method of achieving a goal. So it doesn't matter what the goal is. It doesn't matter who's involved in it, but you're really testing the most successful method of achieving that goal. That's the competition. So if going back to natural selection, I mean the goal is propagating your organism. So how do you do that? You have to have access to the best energy, the best resources, things like that. So that's how I would put a very basic definition of competition. And there's a few key things that I want to point out with this, is that there is a lot of confusion in the educational world about the difference between what we would call the noun of competition, which is what I just described there, versus the adjective of being competitive. And this is where I think a lot of confusion and a lot of hesitancy in the education world comes out in wanting to adopt or being hesitant to adopt competitions, that they think that competitions are by nature competitive, or that by being in a competition, it's going to create aggressive, angry, kind of students, that are super competitive and winner take all at all costs, kind of thing. And that is not at all what the noun competition is about. So you can separate being competitive and the idea of aggression and win at all costs kind of things, separate that from the noun of competition. And when you really just look at the noun of what a competition is, this is a process. It's a process of determining the best mechanism to get to that goal. So you're putting up two or more competing versions of something and figuring out which one does it best. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, but within the competition noun space here, I want to identify a couple different types of competition, and I think Jen or somebody mentioned it in the chat a little bit here, that there's what I call infinite or open-ended competitions. And these are competitions that have few, if any, defined boundary conditions, goals, or even participants. You don't know necessarily who the participants are. So this could be internal competitions, but it could also be external. It could be you're competing against lots of people out there, and there's some really probably well-known versions of what we would consider infinite competitions. And so again, I want to see if anybody can think of what would you consider an infinite or open-ended competition as I've defined it here. Anyone have ideas on these? I'll throw one in there just to get the thinking started, is that dating or searching for mates, that this is a competition, right? Anytime that you're going out and looking for a date or your wife or husband, that you're competing against, the others who are searching for that same affection, right? So this is a competition, but there's no defined rules, to it. So nobody's, gone out there and given the actual rule book, for, dating or exactly how to play the game there. There's no specific boundary conditions on what you can and cannot do. There are, certainly some social norms and things like that, but, that it's a very undefined, competition, and you may not even know who all the participants are. So you might be, trying to find the affection of a certain, young woman or young man, and you don't know who else is, doing the same thing. So that's what we mean by open-ended competition, is that there are things where there's no boundary condition, there's no time limit, so there's no, doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, well, you've got, 3 days to complete this competition or 90 minutes to finish the game or something like that. So Leanne brings up an example of gambling. Yeah, so gambling is a different kind of competition, whether you're competing against the house, or you're competing against other people. So definitely an option there. Another example would be maybe hunting for a job. This is another open-ended kind of undefined competition that maybe there's a little bit more definition in, well, how do you submit your resume and how do you, go through the interview process and all of that. But a lot of times, there's no real rules to what you say in the interview or things like that, or how they evaluate your application. So the infinite open-ended competitions are things that are a little hard to define, a little hard to really figure out, well, how do you actually use something like this, to achieve a goal? You might not know, exactly how to play the game, or there's been no definition to it. So on the other side, you can probably guess that the second type of competition is then your what we call finite or defined, competition. So this is where we put together specific rules, specific, time boundaries, specific goals of, how do you win, and certain limits on how you play the competition. So this is what people typically will say a competition is, right? So, this is what we know of. So the most straightforward example would be sports, right? Athletics. That's what everybody, if you ask a student, to name a competition, first thing that comes to their mind is probably some kind of sport, competition. But this is where the real power of competition comes from, is that when you start to define those rules and set up specific structures to the competition, that's where you can get the power out of achieving a goal that you want to. And it really is a science as far as how you set up the structure and the definitions of a competition. So figuring out, how do you do the rules on the play? How do you do the time limits? The scoring. Everything else about the process and the structure of it. There's a lot of work that goes into it. If anybody is a big sports fan, you might think about the NFL, American football. And the rule book for American football is over 1,000 pages long. So these are over years and years have been so well documented, to achieve a goal. Now, in sports, there's multiple goals that they're trying to achieve, and one of those goals is, of course, just the play of the game. But they're now also looking at marketing and brand value and all of those kinds of things. So there's a lot of other things that go into those kinds of definitions for competitions. So let's just look a little bit at, well, where are competition? Where do we find them? So of course I gave one big example, that the sports world. We have created a sport for just about everything you could possibly think of. I think there's a sport for snail racing now. So everything that humans could think of, we've made a sport for. So that's, competition that proliferated there, but it goes well beyond just sports. So you think about some of the TV programs that are on now, or streaming programs. Survivor was one of the early competition programs on reality competition on, but now reality TV competitions are some of the most viewed, most popular shows on ever. And again, they've proliferated. So you have competitions for just about everything, again, that we can think of. We have competitions for baking, which I never would have really thought of as a kid growing up. But yeah, you get competitions for baking, you get competitions for living on deserted islands, you have competitions for can you tell it's a cake, you have a competition for the best dancing, for the best singing. There's so many different places that competitions are. So that's one of the things that we just wanted to showcase, is that competitions have been developed in just about every aspect of life that humans have thought of. So one other area of competition I want to talk about, just before we get into the meat of education side of things, is how we've used competitions to launch moonshots, or really create grand innovation advances, technological advances that for centuries people have used competitions to launch innovative new solutions to major problems that are out there. So I have a few examples of these that I want to see if you guys can name them. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about some examples here, and see if you can come up with what the competition was. You can, again, just type it into the chat, or shout it out if you think you know it. But the first one I want to talk about is a prize that was created by the English government in 1714. And the purpose was to help its navy be able to sail all over the globe. And the problem was that the Navy could not figure out a way to accurately measure certain types of navigation. So I want to see if anybody remembers what this was, or knows what this one was called. Longitude. Leanne brings it up. Yeah. I was trying not to say the actual word there, but the prize is called the Longitude Prize of 1714. Absolutely. So before 1714, nobody could accurately measure longitude when you're away from land. So it was really difficult for ships to travel, when you're not next to land. So in 1714, the English government put up this prize. It was essentially a multi-billion-dollar prize. At the time, it was 20,000 pounds. So sorry, a $1 million prize. $1.5 million in today's. And Adrian brings it up that it was actually won by a clockmaker. So John Harrison won. No formal training in sailing or shipping, but he was a clockmaker who figured out how to measure longitude. So the point of this is that it sparked a completely new revolution in maritime sailing. Opened up a huge multi-billion-dollar industry to help ships travel all across the seven seas. So the next example, this is the Spirit of St. Louis, Charles Lindbergh, and it was a prize that challenged aviators to go further than ever before, won in 1927. Anyone know the name of this prize? Or specifically what it did? So this was.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
It was an American pilot, and I don't know what's the name of the airplane in English, but it was called Águila Solitaria in Spanish.
I love it. No, you're definitely right. So the name of the airplane was the Spirit of St. Louis. And the pilot was Charles Lindbergh, and he flew from London to New York. And the prize was called the Orteig Prize. So what it was a $25,000 award, or in today's money, about $373,000. And the prize was really to spark a revolution in aviation. That before this prize, nobody really thought as aviation as a passenger, kind of thing. it was for the military or it was for moving cargo, but nobody thought it was a potential passenger industry. So this prize was put up to try to show the world that aviation could be a passenger led opportunity for people to go from one city to another city. And Charles Lindbergh did that by going straight from London to Paris to win this prize, or sorry, from London to New York to win this prize. So again, the prize was the emphasis for launching a completely new industry here. My last example that I want to share is this one. This one's all right. This one's a little more modern that a lot of people probably recognize. So Adrian's already brought it up. Yep. Adrian, you want to tell us a little bit about this one? What do you know about it? Or if you can't.
Well, that was the price that was offered for the first ability to fly into space and return and be able to fly that same ship back up again. And I believe it was within 48 hours or something like that. But yeah, it was offered by Anusha Ansari, who was the benefactor of the prize. And
absolutely, yes. Yeah, 100%. And same as the previous two examples, it sparked a new multi-billion-dollar industry. So the purpose of the Ansari X Prize was to showcase that space flight can be a commercial thing. That this can be something that is more than just NASA or more than just governments. That there can be commercial entities, making businesses out of space flight. Now, what was initially thought of out of this Ansari X Prize is not what we've seen happen. The initial thought was that the Ansari X Prize would lead to commercial passengers, just going in and out of space, on a regular cadence. We still haven't gotten there quite yet. We're kind of on the cusp of that. I would say you've got Blue Origin, you've got Virgin Galactic, you've got SpaceX now, of course, that are offering more options for for paying passengers. But what this prize really did beyond that is that it did show that companies can have a key role outside of NASA and outside of the government in providing space, services, and that there's opportunity for, for the private sector to be a part of this. I'll go through a few quick other ones just that are related to aerospace, because NASA has been one of the key government groups that have adopted the prize model for innovation advancements. So a few years ago, they launched a prize for regenerative medicine. NASA put up $500,000 for technology that could create 3D printed tissues, human tissues. So not just skin, but thick tissues for organs. So like the heart tissue, kidney tissue, liver tissue, things like that. And the reason that they did this is that they saw that in space, there was a big opportunity for new resources, new industries, to use microgravity to do things. And one of those industries is the regenerative medicine industry. That thinking that microgravity would allow us to create these tissues in a better way. So NASA put up $500,000 for the vascular tissue challenge. It was won in 2013, I believe. So there have been a few more experiments now on using microgravity to create bioengineered organs. So we're moving that forward, a little bit. A few other innovative uses of competition, outside of just education. Years ago, when Netflix was young, they actually had an algorithm that was based on your own preferences, and they would try to look at how can we use this algorithm to encourage more viewership. They put out a prize, to help increase the efficiency of that algorithm. So it was really kind of a coding data science, challenge that Netflix put out there. There's this other corporation, called Goldcore, and this is one of my favorite examples here because Goldcore, I mean, it's like the most like the man kind of name of a company here. You can only imagine like Montgomery Burns or something from The Simpsons, sitting on their board here. but what happened with Goldcorp is that a few decades ago they were a mining company, and they owned a whole bunch of land, mostly in Canada, doing mining of gold. And at the time, their board was seeing that the mines were running dry. So they were bringing in a new CEO with the idea that the CEO would essentially sell off their assets and they would shut down the business. But what happened was that the CEO had learned about the value of competitions, and he said, "Hey, let's do a radical idea. Let's open all of our data to the public. We'll have all of our geologic data. We'll have all of the location information about where we have mined, what the different geology is of our land. We're going to open that up and see can anybody out there find new ways for us to identify more gold within the land that we have." So they put up a $500,000 prize purse and opened the data up and had people submit ideas for where they should mine or how they should mine on the land to find more gold. So instead of shutting the business down, this resulted in over $6 billion of new value out of those mines. So talk about a good return on investment. $500,000 prize purse created $6 billion in value, for that company that they were otherwise going to shut it down. So that's just one of the other kind of interesting examples of how competition has really been valuable for lots of different areas. One other thing is I want to talk just really quickly about where competitions fit in a broader innovation spectrum. So a lot of times we think about research grants, we think about investment, we think about other ways to fund opportunities for new innovations or new technology development. Well, a lot of times we miss the opportunity around competitions. So we think about research grants, but they're really valuable when you don't know exactly what you want to achieve. You're researching to figure out, what is the opportunity here? So basic research, fundamental research. This is where you want those research grants that typically are provided by government, but sometimes foundations. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have investment. So this is when you know exactly what you want to achieve. You've got a good idea of how to get there, but you just need to build it. You need to build that car to move you forward. So that's where the investment community comes in. Is that they say, hey, you're pretty far along now. You know where you're going and you know how to get there. Let's give you the money to really get that going. But then there's that sweet spot in the middle of, you know where you want to go. You know what you want to achieve, but you don't yet know how to get there. And that's where competitions are really powerful. So this is all of those examples that I gave around the Ansari X Prize, the Orteig Prize, Longitude Prize. They all fit into this sweet spot in the middle where the government or the prize sponsors knew what we wanted to do. We knew what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to achieve maritime travel, or we wanted to achieve cheap space travel, but we didn't know how to do it. So that's what the prize was for. It was incentivizing, helping people think about how to do that. So that's the big picture on prizes and competitions. I also just want to give a big shout out to NASA, and specifically the Centennial Challenges program at NASA that, as I said before, NASA has been one of the government agencies that has really adopted the prize model to great effect. The Centennial Challenges office at NASA and a few other offices as well are specifically focused on having prizes, for new innovation and new technology development. So if you're interested in that level of prize development, definitely check out Centennial Challenges program. They are available for students. Typically, university students get involved in Centennial Challenges. A lot of the teams that win them are out of universities and have a lot of university student participation. Younger students can participate in Centennial Challenges, but typically they would need to be part of a team that's led by professionals or older adults. All right, so now let's get into the meat of everything for education. That's what we're really here for today. Is this is the Space Education Summit. So what are we talking about, and how do prizes relate to education? Well, I will say that the formal education system has been the last holdout against competitions and prizes. We showed everywhere else, everywhere that we can think of, prizes and competitions have proliferated, but the education system has been reticent about incorporating this as a mechanism into the formal system. So, unfortunately, the formal education system just still fails to embrace competition like we've seen in other areas. So, teachers, they're often forced to do competitions after school or on their own time instead of being able to integrate them directly into the classroom. Because right now the classroom is still so structured around standardized tests and lecture-based learning. And the thing is that there has been a lot of research that competitions and project-based learning and things like that are a much better way of learning. The lecture-based model just does not work. It does not work the way that it should. I love education. I love learning. And I think learning is one of the most exciting things that we can do as humans. But the formal education system, it puts us into this environment that it basically hammers out the opportunity to learn in a fun, engaging way. So that's really where competitions can play a better role. We want to figure out ways to do competitions with our students or do more project-based learning with our students. And I will say there are a ton of great educational competitions out there. So this slide shows just a very small handful of the competitions that are available to students. There are over 1,000 unique competitions available, at a national or international level, for students. So I'm talking about not your local, regional, or state, competitions that flow up into a bigger one, but over 1,000 unique competitions that students can engage in. So, think about how students can really find a competition, just like with, TV shows or sports. I mean, there's a competition for pretty much anything that you want in education. The problem is that the formal system just doesn't really embrace them yet, but we're getting there. We're making progress on it. The educational competitions, they give away over $10 million in awards every year. But the key thing with that is that the award is not why you compete in these. Yes, it's great that students can win scholarships and can win money, but it's the process of going through these competitions that makes them so powerful. And this is one of the big things that we always stress whenever we're talking with our clients about how to use competitions in whatever situation they're in, is that we stress it's not about the award at the end. It's not about just winning. It's about the process that you're going through. So I've got 5 reasons why we compete. And I'm going to, these are the core reasons of why we compete, particularly in educational competitions. The first one is the idea of creating academic heroes. So competitions give us a way to quantify academic skills in a way that it nurtures and it highlights the idea of academic heroes in the same way that we identify them in athletics. So you ask any kid to name a hero, and 90% of them are saying some sports star, or some other competition star, that's out there, because those competitions give them ways to quantify that this is somebody that is excellent at what they do. So creating academic heroes with these educational competitions is something that we want to build up. We want to build up the idea that, hey, there are heroes in academics that are defined experts at what they do. So this is one of the great things with educational competitions. The more that we build them up, the more we'll be able to build up these academic heroes. The second one is that we want to nurture collaboration. And a lot of people think that collaboration and competition are at odds with each other, that you're either competing or you're collaborating. But that is not the case. The case with many competitions, especially if you're in a team-based competition, is that they nurture collaboration. They help teams figure out how to work together. So when you get into a competition, you're all striving to achieve the same goal, and you're seeing that within the team, you need to learn how to collaborate. You need to learn how to work together. But a lot of times you also see teams working together, to help solve, the ultimate problem. So even in the Ansari X Prize, this is one of the programs that I had a chance to work on early in my career. We saw teams that helped each other out. Even though they were competing against each other, they were all so passionate about the end goal that they really wanted to see that goal happen. So they were collaborating between the teams and to figure out, well, how do we move forward? So it's this really exciting opportunity that we see competition nurture collaboration in education and elsewhere. Our third reason for the competition is creating what we'll call the challenge mindset. So a lot of you might have heard of grit, or resilience, and the growth mindset. There's been a lot of educational research on those areas. Well, the challenge mindset is a extension of that. There's been research into whether people fall into what's considered a threat mindset or a challenge mindset. So, or another way of saying it is a loss aversion mindset or a gain orientation mindset. So this happens in sports a lot, but it happens in everyday life, as well. But a good way to understand this is thinking about in, say, a basketball game. Like you've got 3 quarters, and in the first quarter, if one team goes up by a huge amount, say they're up 20 points or something, a lot of times in the third quarter, that lead gets blown. So you get the third quarter slump, and the other team all of a sudden is starting to get up and get back in the game. This is because you fall into a loss aversion mindset. So this happens individually a lot of times. And any different kinds of things, that if we get a lead in something, instead of continuing to think about how do we continue to gain and grow, upon that lead, we go into, okay, well, we need to protect our lead. So it's that loss aversion side of things. So challenges and competitions help us stay in that gain orientation and avoid the loss aversion or the threat mindset. The fourth reason for competition is one of the biggest ones. This is one of my favorites here, is learning from failure and overcoming challenges. This is one of the things that more and more employers are really saying, this is what we want to do, what we want our employees to be able to do. Like, we need them to be able to overcome challenges. If you don't do that in your education, then you're going to have a hard time learning how to do that once you're up in your career. So participating in competitions is a great way of understanding, how do you learn from failure? And that's one of the biggest things that you can learn from the competition is, okay, if you didn't win, well, why not? Analyzing that failure and then going back and doing it again and doing it again. So getting into that iterative mindset of, okay, something didn't work. Let's figure that out and then do it again. So competitions are a great way for students to practice overcoming challenge and learning from their failures. The final reason for doing competitions is celebrating excellence. And this is one of the biggest things that I try to push upon our clients is that the competition, it's not about winning, it's about celebrating excellence. So this is something for, okay, if you didn't win, that's okay, but we're here to celebrate the idea of figuring out the best way to achieve this goal that we're all striving towards. I gave the example in the Ansari X Prize that, a lot of the teams helped each other out. And the idea was that, we all wanted to achieve the same goal. So that's one of the biggest things, for a competition. And a lot of times if you're coaching students in a competition, this is one of the biggest needs of the coach, is to really help those students understand that, it's not just about winning. It's about the idea of celebrating excellence in, this, whatever we're trying to do. So this is an example from one of the biggest educational competitions out there, the VEX robotics competitions. And they do an incredible job at celebrating excellence, throughout the entire program. So yeah, this is one of the things that's the most important piece of educational competitions. The last thing I'm going to share is just what are some of the different types of competitions, and then I'll get to some of the questions in the chat here. I see that some people are bringing up some really good questions, and we'll spend the last time that we have on those. But I want to share with you guys, a little bit about what are the different structures, of educational competition. So some common themes and common ways that that your students might get involved in these programs. So there's 6 general types of competition. You can bucket any educational competition into one or more of these 6 types of educational competitions. So the first type is just an exam or a test-based competition. And a lot of people might even question, are these really competitions? Because you're taking an exam and then you're seeing, well, who performed the best on the exams. But I would still put them up there because you are competing against others, to see who performs the best. There's a lot of mathematics, exam-based competitions. There's a lot of other science and different types of competitions where your students will take an exam and then, see, who can do the best on it. Another type is what we would just call submission-based. So it's where students are given a certain prompt and they're prompted to submit some product, that responds to that prompt. It could be a report, a document, it could be a video, it could be something for social media. But yeah, it's a submission-based, competition that they respond to a specific prompt. Another type would be tournaments. So these would be more of your kind of typical traditional competitions, like from sports, a lot of times, whether they're head-to-head or whether they're bigger groups of tournaments. But there are a lot of tournaments in educational competitions right now. National Science Bowl is one good example. A lot of robotic competitions are tournament based. The next one, I see a few comments in the chat that really fall into this category, the science fairs. So there are other fairs out there, but most people would readily recognize the science fair as the largest science fair that's out there, largest fair that's out there. But fairs are another typical model that we'll see with educational competition. So you can think about, well, yeah, how do you create your project report, your project board, and then you have to go into the big fair to be evaluated by the judges in that situation. The 5th type of competition is performance-based. So this is where you're given a certain task and you have to create something or build something that performs the best at that certain task. So, one example could be your rocketry competitions. There's a bunch of different rocket competitions, and they're trying to see, well, whose rocket can go the furthest or the most specific areas. Carol, bringing up, fuel efficient vehicles. So there's lots of good performance-based competitions across many different STEM industries. And then the last one that I would say is presentation. So this is where your students have to get up there and make the case for something that they are talking about, or speech and debate competitions, case competitions, pitch competitions, where students are making a presentation to convince the judges that their solution or their idea is the best out there. So I really think that if you understand these 6 types of educational competitions, you'll find that you understand a lot about how students can participate in any competition that's out there in any different field. Pretty much every competition that we come across fits into one or maybe more of these different types of educational competitions. So how do you use all of this information? First of all, you can join existing competitions. Like I say, there's over 1,000 that are out there for students. If you're working with students in the classroom, you can create your own. You can create just a classroom-based competition. You can turn a lesson plan into your own challenge. So really learning a little bit about the kind of best practices of, well, how do you think about defining the rules. That's one of the biggest things with it, that when you're creating your competition, you want to make sure that you define it as specific as you can. So a lot of times individual classrooms can do it, schools can have their own competitions, or maybe even a district or other region can create your own competitions. So that's kind of 2 and 3 that we're talking about there. But then the last thing I want to encourage everyone to do is to just help celebrate excellence. That's what we talked about the reason we do this. Help encourage your students to really look at the results of competitions and just celebrate excellence. So not to get stuck on the fact that, well, they didn't win or things like that, but how do you talk about, well, what are some of the biggest things that they can learn from those that did win? And then think about, well, how do they take that forward in learning to overcome their own challenges and move on into the future. All right, that's really the last that I have here. So we've got a few minutes left, and I want to try to go through a little bit of the questions that you all have in the chat here. So I'm just going through a little backup here. But Adrian, you mentioned that encouraging everyone that's able to support your local science fairs by volunteering and being a judge. I will absolutely say that one of the things competitions need the most is volunteers. So every competition we've worked with has desperately needed more volunteers or judges or mentors, for students. So yeah, you can be any kind of volunteer, but just support those programs however you can. Yeah. Just looking through some of the comments, bringing up, lots of opportunities in the science fairs, for everybody. Do the local school fairs if they are more intimate? Absolutely. So I think a lot of times when you're just starting out in a competition, make sure that you're starting out at a local level. Make sure that you're working with something that can kind of get the students into the idea of the competition. And again, stressing that it's not about just whoever won. It's not about winning. It's about the process, and it's about celebrating excellence and things like that. Leanne, you had a question. Have your class research topics, or take photo or in the experiment and submit that to the newspaper. So this is a great comment, actually. That one of the other things that is really powerful in the education space around sharing the value of competitions is getting it out into the public. So local newspapers, local media outlets, local influencers, that there are lots of people that like to share information about these programs, but they need to get that information. So absolutely, want to share that. We have a few other few minutes, just if there are other questions that people have about anything specific around the educational competitions here, or anything about how to develop your own or get involved in something. You can shout it out or type into the chat. Teresa, I see your hand up. Do you still have a question or comment?
Well, in my country, especially in my state, in my home state, it's a little difficult for some people to get involved in competitions because a part or a group of the teachers, of the professors, think that it's not a good idea to compete. So although I am involved in small competitions also in my group and also with another schools, I prefer to work in small groups than individually because of this viewpoint. So I don't know if you can share with me more information or your viewpoint also. Thank you.
A viewpoint around why to get involved in the competitions and why to get more students involved. What I would say is that there are benefits from participating in a competition that your students will not get in formal classrooms. And a lot of those benefits come from what we would call maybe workforce skills, or some people call them soft skills. Things like communication, teamwork, critical thinking, all of those things that you can't teach on a test or from a lecture. So being involved in these competitions is really powerful for the students to have access to and learn those kinds of skills. And one of the biggest ones being the skill of overcoming challenges. This is one of the skills that more and more employers are looking for in their employees. So having a student demonstrate that they've been through competitions and that they have had the opportunity to work on overcoming challenges and overcoming adversity is really powerful when it comes to college and career opportunities for the students. So I think those are some of the biggest opportunities and reasons why to be involved in educational competitions.
Thank you.
And I think we're at time, here now. So I want to thank everybody for spending a little time and learning what's happening in the world of educational competitions. If you have any questions in the future, please feel free to reach out. I think my contact information is with Mark, or we can share that in the future.
Sure thing. Yeah, the descriptions on the site have links to everybody's LinkedIn, so they can find you there. But if you want to drop anything in the chat, feel free. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but thanks, Joshua. This definitely feels like a big piece of the puzzle. Competitions were a big part of driving the growth of the commercial space industry, and they can be a big part of preparing students for it. So great to have everybody here. Thanks for all your participation and questions, too.
Absolutely. Thanks all.